Welcome to the quiet place between waking and dreaming, where every breath feels like a soft memory and every sound carries a story. Tonight, you'll travel through the heart of a family, through laughter, dust, and starlight, where 6 children once searched for treasure, and in doing so, found something far more precious, the light within themselves. Close your eyes, breathe softly, let the air around you settle, and imagine a house, old and worn, standing at the edge of a forgotten London street. Its walls whisper when the wind passes, its windows sigh when night falls, and though its paint is faded, its heart still beats quietly, like a lullaby for those who dare to dream. Inside that house, beneath a ceiling cracked with time, live 6 children, each with eyes bright as candlelight. There is Dora, the eldest, gentle, patient, always trying to be grown up, though sometimes, when no one is watching, she hums lullabies to herself, songs she remembers from when their mother was still alive. There is Oswald, bold, restless, full of grand ideas and louder dreams. His imagination burns like a storm lantern in the dark. Never still, never silent. Dickie, the clever one, quiet but always planning, his mind sharp, his heart honest. Alice, the dreamer, who sees worlds in shadows and hears stories in raindrops, her voice soft, her laughter like water flowing over stones. Then there's Noel, who writes poems nobody understands and stares at the sky as though he's listening for a secret. And little H.O., the youngest, who still believes that cats understand English and that lost buttons are the tears of forgotten toys. They live with their father, a kind man whose eyes once shone with laughter, but now carry the tired shimmer of worry. Since their mother passed away, the world has been harder, money scarcer, smiles rarer, but love still lives there, hidden between the cracks, like sunlight behind old curtains. And so, in that small house, with its peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards, the 6 children whisper to one another at night, telling stories of treasure and glory, of secret maps and lost fortunes, of gold buried under gardens, and jewels hidden behind mirrors. They do not speak of sadness, only of hope. Outside, the evening rain begins to fall, soft and steady, a rhythm older than time. The fire in the hearth flickers like a heartbeat, and in its glow, their shadows dance along the walls, as if the house itself is listening. Someday, says Oswald, his eyes shining, we'll find the treasure. We'll make Father happy again. We'll fix everything. The others nod, half believing, half dreaming. Where will we look? Asked Alice, her fingers tracing invisible stars on the table. In the garden, said Dickie. Or the river, whispered Noel. Or under the floor, added H.O., eyes wide. Dora smiled, tired but soft. Then tomorrow we begin, she said gently. Tomorrow, the treasure seekers set out. The clock ticks slowly in the corner, each sound a heartbeat in the silence. Somewhere outside, a dog barks in the distance, and a carriage rattles past. Inside, the warmth holds them close. The world feels far away, and the children drift to sleep, their dreams filled with golden coins, hidden caves, and laughter echoing through endless summer fields. You can almost hear their hearts, small, steady, full of wonder. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the house itself sigh in peace, as if proud of the hope that still lives within its walls. For in this house, treasure is not gold or silver, but something far gentler: faith, courage, imagination, the kind of riches that no thief can steal and no time can fade. So rest now and let the story breathe around you, like soft light beneath your eyelids. Let your mind drift with the rain, down the streets of long ago London, toward the old gate, the sleeping garden, and the 6 children who dared to dream. Tomorrow, they will begin their search, but tonight, they sleep, and so should you. Breathe softly and return to the quiet world of the Bastable children, where dawn comes slowly, wrapped in golden mist and the scent of rain-soaked earth. The sun rises behind the broken chimney, casting sleepy rays through thin curtains, painting the walls in amber light. The house hums with morning sounds, floorboards stretching, tea kettle whispering, sparrows tapping gently at the window pane. In a small room at the top of the stairs, 6 hearts begin to wake. Blankets stir, yawns bloom, and before long, laughter replaces sleep. Oswald is the first to rise, always restless, his hair wild, his eyes bright with mischief. He presses his face to the cold glass and sees the garden below, a tangle of grass and weeds, wild and whispering under the soft morning light. The garden had once been their kingdom, a place of summer games and secret hiding spots. But time had let it fade. Flowers overgrown, paths forgotten, the old fountain filled with leaves instead of water. Still, Oswald sees something else there, a promise, a mystery waiting to be touched. Wake up, he whispers to the others. There's adventure outside. H.O. blinks sleepily, his small voice curious. Is it breakfast? Better, says Oswald. Treasure. The word rolls through the room like a spark through dry grass. Even Dora looks up from her sewing with a smile. Alice, still half in dreams, whispers, Where? Oswald grins. In the garden, of course. And just like that, the morning becomes magic. They dress in old clothes, boots too big, coats too thin, but spirits bright. Noel carries a notebook, for he says every great explorer keeps one. H.O. brings a broken wooden sword, just in case dragons or ghosts appear. Alice ties her hair with a red ribbon, because she insists heroes must always look brave. Outside, the air is cool and kind. The grass is wet with dew, and every step leaves a silver footprint. Birdsong drifts through the air, soft as lullaby. The garden stretches before them, half wild, half waiting, a forgotten world waking from sleep. They wander among the weeds, lifting stones, peering under bushes, imagining secret doors and buried chests. Dickie kneels near the old apple tree, its bark rough and ancient. He taps the roots with a stick, listening like a doctor to a heartbeat. Here, he says. The earth sounds hollow. Oswald nods solemnly, as if destiny itself had spoken. Then here we dig, with spoons, sticks, and one small rusty trowel. They begin. The ground is stubborn, smelling of rain and worms. The children's laughter mixes with the scrape of metal on stone. Their hands grow muddy, their cheeks warm. It is hard work, but happy work. Every time the soil gives way, they pause, holding their breath, waiting for gold to shine beneath. And every time, only roots, pebbles, bottle caps, nothing more. Dora sighs, wiping her forehead. Perhaps treasure doesn't like to be found so easily, but Oswald only grins, a smear of dirt on his cheek. Then it will just have to learn that we don't give up. Alice plucks a yellow flower and tucks it behind her ear. Maybe, she says softly, the treasure is listening. Noel writes that line down. He always writes the beautiful ones. As the sun climbs higher, the garden glows, not with gold, but with laughter and the quiet joy of being alive together. When they finally stop digging, the hole is deep enough to hold secrets, and their hearts are light enough to float. Oswald stands tall, hands on his hips. We didn't find
That night, long after the candle had been blown out and the house had folded itself into sleep, Oswald lay awake beneath the thin quilt, eyes tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling. The sound of rain whispered across the roof like someone turning the pages of an invisible book. He thought of the pact beneath the apple tree, how real it had felt, how even the smallest words spoken together could light a fire inside the dark. He turned on his side and saw Noel sleeping, one arm around his notebook, his mouth moving slightly as if still speaking to the sky inside his dreams. Dickie snored softly. Alice had fallen asleep with her ribbon still in her hair. The quiet felt enormous, like a sea waiting to be crossed. When morning came, pale and clear, Oswald woke with a new idea burning behind his eyes. He dressed quickly, tugging on his boots before the others stirred. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of yesterday's bread and cool air. He found an old sheet of brown wrapping paper and spread it across the table. If they were to be real treasure seekers, they needed a map. Not the kind sailors use, but the kind that turns an ordinary world into adventure. By the time the others stumbled down for breakfast, he already had the paper filled with uneven circles, crooked lines, and curious symbols. The garden, he explained, tapping the corner of the paper. And here, the river, the railway path, the fields, will mark every place a treasure could hide. H.O. clambered onto a chair to look closer. Where's the dragons? There are no dragons, said Dora, pouring tea, but she was smiling. There might be, Noel murmured, half asleep. In stories, there are always dragons. Alice leaned over the map, her eyes wide. She traced a finger along one of the lines Oswald had drawn. Here, she said softly, there's an old oak near the field. Maybe there's something buried under it. Then we'll mark it with a star, Oswald said, drawing one carefully. They all watched, and for a moment, the kitchen was no longer just a kitchen. It was the heart of an empire. Noel fetched his colored pencils, and soon the map glowed with rivers of blue, hills of gold, tiny houses, winding paths, and secret symbols only they could understand. Each mark became a story waiting to happen. Dickie added a compass rose in the corner. It must point north, he said. All proper maps do. Alice drew a small bird in flight above the house and wrote in tiny letters beside it, home. When they were finished, they sat back in awe. The paper looked like a dream made visible. The ink smudges and uneven strokes gave it life, as though it breathed quietly with them. This, said Oswald, is the beginning of everything. He rolled the paper carefully and tied it with red thread. Dora tucked it into a biscuit tin, and together they hid it in the drawer beside the fireplace, under Father's old account books, safe from the world. After lunch, they carried their excitement into the street. The day was wide and wind-soft, the sky scattered with clouds that looked like ships sailing nowhere in particular. They followed the map in their minds, crossing the narrow lane, passing the baker's shop, the smell of warm bread curling around them like a friendly ghost. At the end of the road, the city thinned into fields. There the grass was high, the wind gentler, the world suddenly larger. They walked single file through the tall stems, the sound of their laughter floating behind them. Oswald unfolded a smaller scrap of paper, a copy of the original map that he had made secretly, and pointed toward a line of distant trees. "Beyond those oaks," he said, "the ground dips. If there's treasure anywhere near, that's where it will wait." They hurried on, imaginations alive. To the children, every shadow might have been a clue, every glint of sunlight a buried coin calling softly from the earth. When they reached the dip, the air smelled of wild mint and damp soil. The grass brushed against their knees, and the sunlight broke into patterns across their faces. Dickie examined the ground with a stick. Noel, inspired, began to recite lines from a poem he'd just invented. "Under the field where silence grows, a sleeping king in sunlight glows. Beneath his hands the treasure lies, dreaming gold beneath blue skies." They clapped when he finished, and even Dora, who pretended not to be impressed, whispered that it sounded almost true. Then, as if the poem itself had given permission, they began to search, lifting stones, scraping at the soil with their fingers, laughing each time a worm wriggled free. Nothing golden came up, no chest, no glittering key, only earth and small roots and the smell of summer. But they did not feel disappointed. Each handful of soil felt like part of something larger, as though the ground itself was a story still writing them in. When the sun began to lower, they packed their things and turned toward home. The wind had quieted, the sky had grown soft and wide. They walked slowly, tired but content, the map folded between them like a heartbeat. Oswald looked back at the field once, the curve of it, the stillness. He could almost believe that, somewhere, far below, a secret waited, listening to their footsteps fade. And though they didn't know it yet, that night, when the house fell silent again and the wind slipped through the chimney, the paper map in the drawer trembled slightly, as if some unseen thread between dream and reality had just been tied. The next morning carried the scent of rain and freshly turned soil. A cool mist lingered over the garden, softening the edges of the world and making every leaf glisten like it had been brushed with light. The children gathered again beneath the apple tree, boots damp, hair untidy, hearts bright. The memory of their pact and their maps still shimmered in their minds, turning this ordinary morning into something almost holy. Oswald stood like a commander before his troops, a spoon in one hand, an old tin bucket in the other. He looked terribly serious, though a smudge of dirt across his nose ruined the effect. "Today," he announced, "we begin our first official expedition in search of treasure." Dickie adjusted his cap. "I still say we should have a flag," he murmured. Alice smiled and held up a handkerchief tied to a stick. "This can be our flag," she said softly, "the color of clouds for luck." They planted it in the earth beside them, and for a moment even Dora couldn't help but feel the thrill of adventure. The air was damp and alive with the sounds of morning, birds calling from chimneys, the distant creak of a cart on the road, and somewhere close, the drip of rain from the old ivy hanging down the wall. "Where do we start?" asked Noel, notebook in hand. "By the wall," Oswald said, pointing. "The ground there's uneven, maybe hollow underneath." The garden, wild and overgrown, seemed to lean toward them as they began to dig, its tangled vines whispering secrets. Their laughter broke through the stillness as they worked with spoons, forks, and small shovels borrowed from the kitchen. Mud splattered their boots, worms wriggled away from the light, and H.O. kept stopping to declare that he'd found a clue, even when it was only a pebble or a bottle cap. Time passed without them noticing. The sun climbed higher, its warmth drying the dew from their hair and sleeves. The hole they'd made grew wider, though no gold appeared, only stones and the delicate threads of white roots. Dickie knelt beside the pit, brushing dirt from his palms. "He thinks," he said thoughtfully, "that if treasure really is buried here, the ground would smell different. It would smell of metal or magic." Alice laughed, and the sound drifted up through the leaves like music. "Maybe it does," she said, twisting a blade of grass between her fingers. "Maybe we just don't know how to smell magic yet." Oswald leaned on his spade and smiled faintly. "Then we'll learn," he said. He believed it too. Belief, after all, was the truest treasure they had. Dora called from the kitchen window, her voice soft but clear. "Don't forget to wash before lunch." Her words floated through the garden, and for a moment they all paused, looking toward the house. The roof gleamed wetly in the sunlight. Smoke drifted from the chimney like a silver ribbon. For all its cracks and faded paint, it looked alive again, as though their laughter had reached into its walls and woken it up. By midday, their hands were sore, their faces streaked with mud, but their spirits were still unbroken. Oswald looked at the pit, then at his crew. "We may not have..."
Now it's the river's turn. His voice held that quiet certainty that always made the others follow. They packed a small basket, bread, 2 apples, a bit of cheese wrapped in paper, and Dora's strict instructions not to fall in. Then they set off down the lane, their boots thudding softly over the damp earth, the world bright and washed after a night of rain. The path to the river wound through meadows. Buttercups shone like drops of sun in the grass. Noel recited fragments of poems about sailors and lost kingdoms. Alice carried a small glass bottle to collect magic water, and H.O. swung his wooden sword as if guarding a royal caravan. When they reached the bank, the water lay before them like a ribbon of moving glass. It whispered against the stones, folded over itself in gentle waves, and caught the light in quick silver flashes. Across the far side, willows leaned so low their leaves brushed the surface, drawing delicate green lines across the current. "This," Oswald declared, "is where pirates would hide their gold." He crouched, tracing circles in the sand with a stick. "Somewhere near the bend, perhaps, where the water's deep." Dickie peered into the river. "I don't see any chests." "That's because you have to imagine them first," Alice said, kneeling to watch her reflection ripple and vanish. "Everything real starts as something imagined." They followed the bank downstream, boots sinking into soft mud, the sound of the water following them like a song. H.O. found a long branch and used it as an oar, pretending to steer the invisible ship through stormy seas. Soon the air filled with laughter again, that wild, free kind that carries farther than you expect. Noel slipped on a stone and nearly fell. Dora caught his arm just in time, and for a second, the whole world felt as if it had leaned in to laugh with them. At a narrow curve where the current slowed, they discovered an old, half-broken boat pulled up on the bank. Its paint was peeling, its ropes frayed, but to the children it was perfect. A real pirate ship, waiting. Oswald jumped in first,
testing the boards with his heel. "They're sound enough," he announced. The others climbed in after him, and soon the little craft rocked gently, anchored in the shallows, their reflections trembling on the surface below. "Captain Oswald," Alice said, saluting, "where shall we sail?" "To the island of hidden gold," he answered. "Where's that?" asked H.O. "Wherever the wind decides," Oswald replied, and pushed them off with the branch. The boat drifted a few yards, spinning slowly with the current. The river made its soft, endless murmur beneath them. All around, the day unfolded in quiet color: green water, blue sky, the brown glint of sand beneath the shallows. Noel, always half in another world, began to hum a tune that wasn't quite a song, more a thought that had found its way into sound. Dickie lay back against the side, watching clouds pass overhead, and Dora, though pretending not to, smiled at the way they all fit together, like notes in a song the world was writing for them. For a time, they forgot about treasure. The search became something else, a drifting, a shared stillness, the pleasure of simply being there, together in a boat that wasn't really seaworthy, on a river that might as well have been the edge of the world. When the current nudged them gently toward a tangle of reeds, Oswald guided the boat back with his stick, but the movement sent a splash across them, cool and bright. H.O. squealed, Alice laughed. The moment became endless and small all at once. By late afternoon, they pulled the boat ashore, their clothes spattered, their faces glowing. They ate the last of the bread on the bank, the crumbs carried away by wind and water. Above them, the sky began to pale, and the first hint of evening crept across the fields. Before leaving, Oswald took a flat stone and scratched a mark onto the side of the boat. A crooked star, their secret sign. "So we'll know where our ship is," he said. "It'll wait for us." The others nodded. Even Dora believed it then, that the world would remember them somehow, that every laugh and mark and footprint they left would linger, shimmering quietly just beneath the surface of things. They walked home as the light faded, the river murmuring behind them, the sound steady and patient, like a promise they hadn't yet learned to understand. And far away, under the hush of twilight, the apple tree in the garden stirred slightly in the wind, its leaves rustling in approval, as if the house itself had heard their story and was dreaming it too. The next day rose with sunlight that felt new, as if the world had been gently polished overnight. The river glimmered in the distance, and the garden, still marked by their digging, looked proud of its scars. Oswald woke before the others. He lay still for a moment, listening to the faint ticking of the clock downstairs, to the sigh of wind through the chimney, to the deep, breathing hush of a house not yet awake. He loved that quiet, the moment before everything began again. When the rest of them stirred, it was Noel who started the idea. He had been gazing at the sky from his pillow, watching the slow drift of clouds, and in his half-dreaming voice he said, "I think the clouds build castles when we aren't looking." Alice, still tangled in sleep, turned toward him. "Castles?" "Yes," Noel murmured. "Great shining towers made of light. Maybe that's where lost treasures go, and maybe they fall as rain when the castles melt." The thought caught fire between them. By breakfast, the others had joined in, H.O. declaring he had seen a dragon's shadow once in the clouds, Dickie arguing that clouds couldn't hold bricks, and Oswald insisting that imagination didn't need bricks at all. After breakfast, they climbed onto the low wall at the end of the garden, their faces turned toward the open sky. Above them stretched a vast canvas of white and silver, clouds drifting slow and grand, changing shape with every breath of wind. "That one looks like a ship," said Alice. "Or a palace," whispered Noel. Oswald shaded his eyes. "Maybe both. A palace that sails." They watched the sky in silence for a long while. It moved and breathed like something alive. The clouds gathered and reshaped themselves, pillars becoming bridges, arches opening into shining gates. It was easy to believe that kingdoms floated there, just beyond reach. Oswald, who never gave in to dreams, found himself pointing upward too. "Look there," he said softly, "a tower!" And indeed, a tall, white column of cloud rose against the blue, its top spreading into delicate silver battlements, a castle of light, real as breath. "Maybe," Alice said, "that's where the treasure waits. Not in the ground, but up there, where you have to dream it before you can touch it." The idea settled over them like warmth. They didn't speak for a long time. The garden, the street, the city all seemed to fall away, leaving only the quiet sky, the sound of wind through leaves, and the heartbeat of something bigger than words. Noel took out his notebook and began to write. He wrote slowly, as if catching the rhythm of clouds. "There is a castle made of light, with towers drifting through the sky. Its gates are made of silver dreams. Its halls are where the echoes lie." Oswald smiled. "Good," he said. "Very good. We'll call it the Castle of Clouds. If we ever get tired of digging, that's where we'll go." H.O. asked, "How?" Oswald looked up again, his eyes bright. "We'll find a way." The day moved gently around them. Dora came out with washing to hang, her hands full of white linen that fluttered in the wind like new clouds of its own. The air smelled of soap and sunlight. She listened to their talk as she pinned the sheets, half smiling, half wishing she could believe so easily again. When the last cloth was hung, she paused beside them. "You know," she said softly, "maybe there really are castles up there, just not the kind you can live in. Maybe they're places for dreams to rest before they come true?" Noel looked up at her, wide-eyed. "I'll write that down," he said, and did. By afternoon, the sky began to thicken with darker clouds, and the light turned silver gray. The first low rumble of thunder moved across the distance, not frightening, only deep and slow, like the voice of the world turning in its sleep. Dickie gathered their papers and books before the wind could take them, and they retreated to the porch, watching the storm build. Rain began as a whisper, then as 1,000 soft fingers drumming the roof. The smell of wet earth rose sweet and sharp. "It's the castle melting," Alice said quietly. "Maybe it's sending us a sign." "What kind of sign?" asked Oswald. "That we're getting closer." His hands clasped loosely around his teacup. When they had finished, he spoke at last. "You remind me of myself," he said. "When I was your age, I spent a summer searching for treasure in the hills near my home. I never found gold, but I learned to see the world differently, to notice how light changes across stone, how rivers remember the sky. That was treasure enough." The room grew quiet. Even Dora, who tried to stay busy with the dishes, paused to listen. His words settled over them like a soft blanket. "What do you do now?" Dickie asked. "I write," the man replied. "Stories, mostly. Sometimes about real people, sometimes about what might have been." "Do you make money from that?" Oswald asked with blunt curiosity. The stranger laughed, a gentle sound that filled the small kitchen. "Some days I do," he said. "Other days I find my payment in places like this, in being reminded what it means to believe in something." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, its corners worn smooth from use. "You may borrow this, if you like," he said, handing it to Noel. "It's empty now, but stories live best when they're shared. Noel took it as though it were made of glass. "I'll fill it with adventures," he whispered. "I'm sure you will," the man said. After finishing his tea, the stranger stood. The children followed him to the gate, the mist curling around their ankles. He thanked Dora again for the warmth and bread, then turned toward the lane. For a moment, he paused and looked back. "Keep searching," he said. "The world hides its best treasures where hearts are kind enough to find them." And with that, he was gone, his figure fading slowly into the silver morning. For a long while, none of them spoke. The world felt different somehow, larger, quieter, full of new meaning. When they went back inside, the kitchen seemed brighter, as though the stranger had left some invisible light behind. Noel placed the notebook carefully on the table, his fingers lingering on the cover. Oswald broke the silence first. "Maybe he was a wizard," he said. Alice smiled faintly. "Or a poet." "Or both," Dickie added. Dora, setting the teacups to dry, said softly, "Whoever he was, he saw something good in us." That thought stayed with them all day, the idea that perhaps their search for treasure wasn't foolish at all, that every step, every question, every small act of kindness was part of finding something greater. And that evening, when the wind rose again and brushed against the windows, the sound was not lonely. It felt like the whisper of a friend passing by, a reminder that somewhere, out beyond the mist, the gentle stranger was walking still, carrying their story with him. The next morning unfolded beneath a sky the color of warm milk. Light slipped through the kitchen window and fell softly across the floorboards, picking out the floating dust motes that turned lazily in the air, like tiny stars. The scent of bread and soap mingled with the faint sweetness of apples left from yesterday. It was a day that felt quiet from the inside out, a day made for small discoveries. Dora had decided it was cleaning day. Father would be home early from town, and the house, she said, needed to look like Hope still lived there. So out came the brooms, the dust cloths, the bucket that creaked with every step up the stairs. The others, of course, turned even this into an adventure. Oswald declared that cleaning the attic would be a treasure mission, for if treasure hid anywhere in their home, surely it must be up among forgotten trunks and boxes. Dora rolled her eyes, but handed him the key anyway. She warned, "If you fall through the ceiling, you can explain it to Father yourself." The door to the attic opened with a sigh, as though it hadn't been touched in years. A beam of pale light filtered through the small window, catching the silver threads of cobwebs and the slow dance of dust that hung suspended in the air. It smelled of old paper and lavender soap long gone dry. They climbed carefully, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the boards. Everywhere they looked, there were shapes under sheets, ghostly outlines of furniture, boxes stacked like sleeping soldiers, a mirror whose surface had fogged with time. H.O. sneezed loudly. "It's haunted," he whispered. "Only by memories," Alice said, running her hand across an old trunk. The wood was cool beneath her fingers, the metal latches still strong, though tarnished with age. Oswald knelt and pried it open. Inside lay neatly folded fabrics, a faded blue shawl, a pair of children's shoes too small for any of them,
a bundle of letters tied with ribbon now the color of tea. The air around them seemed to still. Dora had followed them up quietly, and when she saw what lay inside, her breath caught. She knelt beside Oswald and lifted the bundle gently, untying the ribbon with fingers that trembled just a little. The top letter was written in their mother's careful hand. She read the first few lines aloud, her voice low and full of something both warm and aching. "My dear, if ever the days feel too long, remember that every hour spent in love is a piece of treasure no one can take." The words faded there, where the ink had blurred. For a long time no one spoke. Even H.O., who never stayed quiet for long, stood perfectly still, his hands clasped together. Dora folded the letter again, pressing it gently to her chest before tucking it back into the box. She said, "She used to write Father when he worked late. I remember her reading them by the fire." Oswald's throat felt tight. He didn't know what to say, so he reached into the box and lifted out the shawl instead. It smelled faintly of lavender still, and when he held it, for a moment, it was as though the room had grown warmer. Alice brushed a tear from her cheek. "She would like that we're still together," she said softly. "She always said the best treasure was love that doesn't fade." The sunlight through the small window brightened suddenly, and the air shimmered with the dust they had stirred. It looked almost golden. Dickie smiled faintly. "Then we've already found something," he whispered. They stayed there for a while, sitting in the quiet light, each holding a small piece of the past, a ribbon, a letter, a thought. Downstairs, the clock struck noon, and the chime drifted up through the boards like a heartbeat. Eventually, Dora stood. She said, "Come, we should finish before Father comes home." But her voice had changed. It carried less of worry now, more of calm. They packed the box neatly again, setting it by the window where the light could rest on it. When they left the attic, it didn't feel like a place of ghosts anymore. It felt alive, like a room that had been waiting to be remembered. All afternoon, the house hummed with quiet work. Windows were opened, the scent of soap and sunlight filled every corner, and laughter slipped easily through the halls. When Father came home that evening, he paused on the threshold, looking around as though he too felt the difference. The house seemed lighter, the air warmer. He smiled and ruffled H.O.'s hair. "It's good to come home to a place that breathes again," he said. They didn't tell him about the letters. Some treasures are meant to stay private, held close between memory and the heart. Later, after supper, Oswald sat by the window watching the last of the daylight fade. The sky above the rooftops burned with soft orange and rose, the kind of light that feels like forgiveness. He thought of the attic, of the shawl, of his mother's writing, and of how strange it was that finding something lost could make the world seem new again. Behind him, the others were laughing quietly, Noel reading a line from his notebook, Alice humming to herself. He smiled, feeling the day settle around him like a warm blanket. Outside, the first star appeared, small, patient, bright, and in the peaceful hush that followed, the Bastable house stood steady against the coming night, a little less empty, a little more alive. The next morning dawned pale and calm, a faint mist still clinging to the garden like the memory of a dream. Bird song threaded softly through the open window, and somewhere far away a church bell counted the slow rhythm of time. In that quiet hour before breakfast, Noel sat cross-legged by the fireplace, turning the stranger's gifted notebook in his hands. Its cover had grown warm from being near him, and when he opened it, the blank pages seemed to shimmer faintly in the light, like they were waiting for a story that already knew how it would end. Oswald came in, hair still untidy, eyes alive with ideas. He announced, "I've got it. Our next expedition. Not the river this time, nor the attic, the old library in town." Dora, carrying a tray of teacups, frowned. "The library? That's hardly treasure hunting." "It's full of secrets," Oswald said simply, "and stories are treasure too." Alice, who was braiding her hair near the window, looked up. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Books remember things people forget." So it was decided. After chores were done and Father had gone to work, they would walk to the town library. The air outside was fresh and full of early sunlight, the road lined with puddles that mirrored the sky. They passed hedges heavy with raindrops, the scent of earth and stone following them as they went. The library stood at the edge of the square, an old stone building with ivy crawling up its sides. Its tall windows looked like eyes half-lidded with dreams, and when the great wooden door creaked open, a hush fell over them all. Inside, the air smelled of dust, ink, and time. Shelves rose high and deep, lined with books in faded colors: green, brown, crimson, gold. The light filtered through tall glass panes, catching the floating dust and turning it into gold dust in the air. The librarian, an elderly man with spectacles perched low on his nose, looked up from his desk. He smiled when he saw them. "Ah," he said kindly, "the explorers return." Oswald blinked. "You know us." The man chuckled. "Word travels fast. The children who dig for treasure in gardens and float down rivers, you're not so easily forgotten." They looked at one another, half startled, half proud. The librarian beckoned them closer. He said, "If you're searching for treasure, perhaps I can help you find the kind that doesn't rust." He led them through rows of shelves to a quiet corner where the air felt thick with stories. On a small table lay an old atlas, its pages yellowed, its cover frayed at the edges. The librarian opened it gently. He said, "This isn't just a map of places. It's a map of the people who once believed in them. Every name on these pages, every island, every mountain, was first imagined by someone who refused to think the world was small." Alice traced her fingers over the lines, following the curling script that spelled names of seas and forgotten kingdoms. "Did they really exist?" she whispered. The librarian's eyes twinkled. "They do, somewhere. Everything imagined exists somewhere." Noel took out his notebook and began to write. Words flowed from him easily now, as though the library itself was whispering into his ear. H.O. tugged at Oswald's sleeve. "Do you think," he asked in a hush, "that one of these places hides our treasure?" Oswald didn't answer right away. He was looking at a page marked, "The River of Stars." The drawing showed a winding line of silver ink, threading through lands unnamed. He thought of their river, how it caught the light like that on certain afternoons. He smiled faintly. Maybe it already has. The librarian watched them for a long time before speaking again. He said, "There's another kind of treasure, something the world often loses." "What kind?" Dora asked. "Wonder," he said simply. "Most people grow too busy to look for it. But you children, you still know where to dig." The clock in the corners struck noon. They hadn't noticed how long they'd been there. The librarian closed the atlas and handed it to Oswald. He said, "Take it. It's missing a few pages, but perhaps you'll fill them yourselves." Oswald's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure. The world needs new map makers." They thanked him, quietly, sincerely, and carried the atlas out into the afternoon light. The air outside was crisp, the clouds white and slow-moving overhead. They walked home together, Noel writing as he walked, Alice humming a tune that seemed to come from nowhere, and Oswald carrying the book like it was made of gold. When they reached their street, Dora paused to look back. The library's tower rose faintly in the distance, its windows flashing sunlight for just a second, as if winking at them. That evening, they gathered in the garden again. The atlas lay open on the grass, its pages glowing in the twilight. Oswald drew new lines across it with careful strokes. The river they'd sailed, the attic they'd explored, the apple tree where their pact still slept. And beneath it all, he wrote, "Here begin the true adventures of the treasure seekers." As night deepened and fireflies began to rise, they sat close together, the book between them, their laughter soft against the hum of the world. And far off, in the library that never truly slept, the old librarian closed his eyes and smiled, as if he could feel their story glowing like a candle through the dark. Evening descended like a secret that only the sky could keep. The last streaks of gold folded behind the rooftops, and a thin silver moon climbed slowly into view, its light trembling on the river like spilled silk. It was Noel who had the idea first. They had gathered in the garden after supper, the atlas spread open across the old wooden bench, the air filled with the gentle hum of summer insects. Noel's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. He said suddenly, "Let's make lanterns, real ones, for our next expedition." Lanterns? H.O. tilted his head. Why not torches? Pirates always have torches. Because, Noel said softly, torches burned fast and fierce. Lanterns glow slow and kind. They guide you, not scare the dark away. Alice clapped her hands. "That's beautiful," she said, "and easier to make." So they set to work, gathering empty jam jars from the kitchen, bits of string and scraps of colored paper Dora dove in an old drawer. Father had gone to bed early, and the house was quiet except for the rustle of their hands and the soft chatter of imagination. Alice cut stars and moons from the paper, gluing them gently to the glass. Noel painted faint words around the rims, tiny spells and fragments of poems: light the path, guard the dream, keep the wonder burning. Dickie mixed melted candle wax with a bit of oil, pouring it carefully into each jar. When the wicks were lit, the lanterns glowed like captured sunrises, soft, steady, golden. They carried them outside, the night cool against their cheeks, and hung them from branches of the apple tree. The garden filled with light, small, trembling circles that swayed with the wind, painting their faces in warm, moving gold. "It looks like a sky fell down," Alice whispered. Dora smiled faintly. "Or maybe heaven came closer."
For a long while, no one spoke. They sat together on the grass, watching the lanterns flicker. The soft creak of branches above them mixed with the faraway sound of the river. Oswald leaned back, hands behind his head. "We've explored gardens, rivers, attics, and even a library full of secrets," he said. "Maybe our next treasure isn't buried or written at all. Maybe it's something we make ourselves." "What do you mean?" Dickie asked. Oswald turned his face toward the nearest lantern. "Maybe every story, every map, every promise, they all lead back here, to light, to us." The words hung in the air, quiet but sure. Noel wrote them down, of course, the ink glimmering faintly in the candlelight. H.O. yawned and leaned against Alice. "Do you think," he murmured sleepily, "that the lanterns can see us too?" Alice looked up at them, so many small lights, each trembling with life. "Yes," she said softly, "and I think they're proud." A breeze drifted through the garden, and for a moment all the lanterns swayed together, their flames bowing like gentle dancers. The whole world seemed to breathe in time with them. Later, when the children went inside one by one, Oswald stayed behind. He looked around the garden, at the soft glow resting on the leaves, at the faint shimmer on the river beyond the hedge. He thought of their mother's letter, of the stranger's words, of the librarian's gift. And deep inside, he understood something he hadn't been able to before. That treasure wasn't about finding, it was about keeping something alive. Wonder, kindness, light. He reached up and touched the nearest lantern. Its glass was warm beneath his fingers. "Keep watch," he whispered to it, and then turned toward the house. Inside, the windows glowed like lanterns too, each room holding a small circle of warmth. And outside, in the sleeping garden, the apple tree stood tall, its branches dressed in golden stars, guarding the dreams of all who believed. The next morning began with quiet light drifting through the curtains, a stillness that felt like the pause between breaths. The house was unusually calm, no clatter, no laughter yet, only the soft ticking of the hallway clock and the slow hum of morning stretching awake. Dora was the first downstairs. She lit the fire and set the kettle on, the faint scent of smoke curling through the room. When she opened the front door to fetch the milk, something slipped from the letter slot and landed softly at her feet. It was an envelope, pale brown, the edges slightly wrinkled from travel. Her name was written across it in neat handwriting she didn't recognize. There was no stamp, no address, just "To the treasure seekers," in graceful black ink. Her heart stirred. She called the others, and soon they came tumbling down the stairs, still half asleep, hair tousled, eyes bright with curiosity. Oswald picked it up carefully, turning it over as though it might hold magic. "There's no sender," he murmured. "Maybe it's a clue." Alice leaned closer, her voice hushed. "Open it." Oswald broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, and tucked within it something small and heavy. A brass key, old and beautifully carved. Noel's eyes widened. "It's a key," he whispered. "But to what?" Oswald unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, each word written with care. "Dear seekers, when one searches long enough for gold, they often find light instead. Your laughter reached farther than you know, across the town, across hearts that needed to remember joy. You have reminded me that treasure does not hide in the earth, but in the eyes of those who dare to dream. This key belongs to a door few notice. It stands where silence keeps its stories, and where time still waits to be found. Seek it not with haste, but with wonder. From a friend of dreamers." The children looked at one another in silence. Dora touched the key, her brow furrowed. "A door few notice," she murmured. "Do you think—" "The library," said Oswald at once. Alice nodded slowly. "It fits. Silence, stories, time. That's where they live." Noel clutched his notebook. "He said to seek it with wonder," he whispered. "Maybe it's not just a key to a door. Maybe it's to something else." They spent the rest of the morning preparing as if for a great journey. They polished their shoes, packed sandwiches, and a small jar of lemonade, and Noel tied the key to a string and wore it around his neck like a medal of honor. By the time they reached the town square, the sun was high, and the library's stone walls glowed with quiet dignity. Inside, the same hush welcomed them, a deep, kind silence that seemed to recognize them. The librarian looked up from his desk, smiling faintly. "Back again, map makers." Oswald held up the key. "We received this, and a letter." "We think it might be from you." The old man took the key, turned it in his hand, and his eyes softened. "No," he said gently, "not from me, but I know what it opens." He stood and motioned for them to follow. They walked through the maze of shelves, past the reading tables, to a narrow door half hidden behind a curtain. It looked ordinary, painted gray, with a lock rusted from age. The librarian stepped aside. "Try it." Noel's fingers trembled slightly as he fit the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if the door had only been waiting for their touch. The hinges creaked softly, and beyond lay a small circular room, lit by a single high window. Dust floated in the air, each mote shining like a golden thought. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, not thick volumes, but thin, leather-bound journals, each marked only with a date and a name. "What is this place?" whispered Alice. The librarian's voice was low. "This," he said, "is the Library of Lost Voices. Every book here holds the dreams of those who once walked these streets, people who wished, believed, and remembered. Most were forgotten, but not erased." Oswald reached out and opened one. Inside were pages of handwriting, letters, poems, unfinished tales. One line caught his eye. "The children who laugh by the river will find what others have buried in fear." His throat tightened. The ink was faint, but the words seemed alive, as if they had been waiting for him. Dora ran her fingers along the spines of the books. "Is it possible," she asked softly, "that one day our names might be here too?" The librarian smiled. "If you keep seeking with wonder, I should think so." For a long time, they said nothing. They only stood there, surrounded by the quiet murmur of forgotten voices, each child feeling the strange, comforting weight of the world's memory pressing gently around them. When they finally stepped back into the main hall, the light outside had changed. Afternoon was falling. Gold had deepened to amber. The librarian closed the door carefully, but left the key in Noel's hand. "Keep it," he said. "Stories always find their way home." They walked back through the square in thoughtful silence, the air rich with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Oswald carried the atlas under his arm, Noel still wore the key, and though they spoke little, each knew they had crossed into something new, a kind of magic that didn't vanish when morning came. That night, before sleeping, Alice whispered into the dark, "Do you think the stranger knew we'd find it?" Oswald answered softly, "I think he knew we already had." And outside, the lanterns still glowed faintly in the garden, their light steady and small, like the memory of every story ever told, alive and waiting.
"It looks the same," he said softly, "but it feels different." "Maybe it's not the river that's changed," Dora said. "Maybe it's us." They followed the bend where reeds brushed the surface, and the sunlight broke into 1,000 shifting pieces. Noel stopped suddenly, pointing. "Look, there!" Beneath the willows where they had once found the broken boat, something new shimmered just below the waterline. A small, round object, metal, dull but not rusted. Oswald waded in, his boots sinking into the cool mud. He reached down, the river curling gently around his arm,
and lifted it free. It was a locket. Old, simple, its chain tangled with tiny threads of grass and time. Alice wiped it clean with her sleeve, and when she opened it, they saw inside a faded picture, a woman smiling softly, her face blurred with years, and beside it, a line of words engraved so small that only in the right light could they be read. For those who still believe. No one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Dora touched the edge of the locket. It must have belonged to someone who came here long ago. Oswald turned it in his palm, watching how the sunlight caught on its surface. Or maybe, he said quietly, the river kept it for us. Noel, half in wonder, wrote the words down. The river remembers, he murmured. It remembers everyone who listens. They spent hours by the bank, watching the water slide past, its reflections painting their faces in fragments of gold and green. The locket rested on the atlas between them, like a seal, a piece of the world choosing to stay. H.O. found a smooth, flat stone and skipped it across the water. Each bounce sent small circles widening outward, breaking the mirror of the river for just a moment before it healed itself again. That's how stories travel, Alice said. They ripple. Even when they fade, something of them still moves. When the sun climbed high overhead, they lay back in the grass. Clouds drifted above them, slow, luminous, endless. Noel read from his notebook, his voice soft and rhythmic, like part of the river's own language. There is a place where memories sleep beneath the silver flow, and when you listen quietly, the river lets you know. Dora closed her eyes. She said, "It's true. I can almost hear it now." They listened. The water moved and whispered, telling stories too old to name. It spoke of the stranger with the golden eyes, of children before them, of promises kept under apple trees. It spoke, too, of things yet to come, new seekers, new maps, new light. As they walked home later that afternoon, the locket hung from Alice's neck, catching the sun like a small star. She touched it once, lightly, and smiled. It feels warm, alive. Oswald glanced at her, then at the winding ribbon of the river behind them. "It should," he said. "It remembers us now." When they reached the garden, the lanterns from the night before still hung in the apple tree, their glass glinting softly in the fading day. Oswald looked up at them, then down at the atlas under his arm. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll mark the river on our map again, but this time we'll call it the river that remembers." And as twilight folded over the world, the river kept singing, a lullaby of journeys and returns, of everything found and never truly lost. The following week arrived dressed in color and sound. Posters bloomed on the walls of the town square, bright as wildflowers. Annual Harvest Festival, music, lights, and magic for all. The Bastables had seen the festival before, but this year felt different. The air itself seemed alive with waiting, and every whisper of wind carried a kind of promise. From their garden gate, they could already hear it, the distant hum of laughter, the echo of fiddles tuning somewhere near the riverbank, the faint perfume of roasted chestnuts drifting through the cool air. Dora tied ribbons in Alice's hair. Oswald polished the brass locket until it gleamed. Even H.O. looked solemn as he tucked his wooden sword into his belt. It wasn't just a day of celebration, it was another chapter, one they didn't yet know the ending of. When they reached the square, it was alive with light. Paper lanterns hung from every tree, their reflections rippling in the river below. Stalls lined the cobblestones, spices, toys, candied apples shining red as rubies. The smell of cinnamon and laughter filled the air. Noel stopped near the fountain, notebook in hand. He whispered, "I could write 100 poems about this." "Then start with one," said Alice, smiling. Oswald led them through the crowd, past jugglers and fire dancers, past an old man who played a violin so soft it sounded like memory itself. The music seemed to weave through the smoke and laughter, binding the moment together. They watched a puppet show by the bridge, ate roasted corn dripping with butter, and for the first time in weeks, Father joined them, his eyes tired but lighter than before. He laughed when H.O. tried to win a game of ring toss, and when Dora handed him a paper cup of cider, he said quietly, "I'd forgotten what joy sounds like." Night came slowly, folding over the square like a velvet curtain. Lanterns flared brighter. Children ran with sparklers trailing golden light. The band began to play faster tunes, and soon the cobblestones turned into a dance floor. Alice twirled with Noel, both laughing too hard to keep rhythm. Dora spun once with Father, her eyes glimmering under the glow of the lights. Even Oswald, usually so sure and serious, was swept into the dance by a group of strangers. The night whirled and shimmered, every heartbeat alive with color and sound. Then, as if guided by invisible hands, the music softened slightly. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush rippled through the crowd. At the center of the square, a woman stood on a small wooden stage. She wore a cloak the color of midnight, her hair silver under the lanterns. When she raised her hands, the crowd fell utterly silent. "Tonight," she said, "we honor the turning of the year, the night when shadows remember their names and light listens." She gestured toward the river where dark water reflected every flame from above. "Each of us carries a shadow, but we need not fear it, for only through shadow can we see the glow of what we love." At her words, people stepped forward one by one, taking small paper boats from a basket beside her. Each person whispered something into the folded boat, a wish, a regret, a secret, and placed it gently upon the water. Soon the river filled with tiny moving lights, each drifting slowly away, mirrored by the stars above. It was as if the earth and sky were speaking to each other in a language made of fire and reflection. The Bastables watched in reverent silence. Noel held his notebook close, his lips moving as he wrote. Dora wiped her eyes softly, pretending it was the wind. Alice bent to release her own small lantern boat. "What did you wish for?" Oswald asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "For something that never fades." He hesitated, then set his own boat afloat.
The candle's light trembled, then steadied as it joined the others, drifting out toward the farthest bend of the river.
When they finally walked home, the air was cool and sweet, the lanterns still glowing behind them. The sound of laughter and river water followed, blending into one soft harmony. Back in their garden, they paused beneath the apple tree. The lanterns they'd hung nights ago still swayed gently in the breeze, their light mingling with the faint glow of the moon. Alice looked up and whispered, "It's as if the sky came down again." And Oswald, gazing at the soft shimmer of their little world, answered, "No, maybe we just learned to look up long enough to see it." Above them, the stars shimmered like quiet promises, and the river beyond the hedge kept carrying their lights toward tomorrow. The festival had left behind a kind of golden silence. The next morning, the town seemed to breathe slower, as though the world itself were resting after its night of laughter. Banners fluttered faintly in the breeze, and the river, still dotted with a few drifting candle boats, glowed like a necklace of forgotten wishes. At the Bastable house, the air smelled of rain and old stone. Dora was sweeping the front hall when her broom caught on something hidden beneath the wallpaper, a small tear near the baseboard, just enough to glimpse something tucked behind the plaster. "What's this?" she murmured, kneeling to pull at the edge carefully. Behind the wall, in a hollow between bricks, lay a folded piece of paper, yellow with age. By the time the others came running at her call, she was already holding it in her hands, the dust of years soft against her fingertips. The paper was fragile, the ink faded to the color of dried leaves, but the words, though trembling, still spoke clearly. "To those who live here after me, I leave this letter as a voice to the future. This house has held laughter and loss, and if you listen closely, you will hear both in the walls. I built it not with wealth, but with hope that kindness might find shelter here. If you are reading this, then time has done its work, and yet I believe something remains. For every brick remembers a hand, and every floorboard remembers a step. Take care of this place, and it will take care of you. E.M., 1847. They stood in silence after Dora finished reading. The wind from the open window fluttered the letter, as if the house itself was exhaling after keeping it secret for so long. Oswald's eyes shone. "He built this house," he said softly. "He must have written it when it was new." Noel leaned close, touching the fragile edge of the paper. "It feels alive," he whispered, "like he's still here, just behind the wall." Alice looked around the hall, the worn banister, the scuffed floorboards, the sunlight slipping through the old glass panes. "Maybe he is," she said. "Maybe that's what happens when people build something with love. A part of them stays." They placed the letter carefully on the table. Dora found an old frame in the attic, its glass cracked but serviceable, and together they mounted the letter behind it. She hung it above the hearth, where the firelight could touch it each evening. When Father came home that night, they showed it to him. He read it twice, his hand resting on the frame for a long while afterwards. "I never knew," he said quietly, "all these years living here, and I never thought the house had a voice of its own." "It does now," Dora said, smiling faintly. "We just helped it remember." Dinner that night felt different. not louder, but warmer, as though something invisible had joined them at the table. The walls seemed to hum softly with their laughter, and the shadows on the ceiling moved as if they were listening. Later, when the younger ones had gone to bed, Oswald sat by the fire with the atlas open across his knees. He drew a small square at the center of the map, the shape of their house, and next to it he wrote, "The home that remembers." He leaned back, watching how the firelight flickered against the frame of the letter on the wall. The handwriting inside glowed faintly in the orange light, as though answering his gaze. Outside, the wind rose gently, rustling through the garden, through the apple tree, through the paper lanterns that still hung there, their flames soft but unbroken. And in the hush that followed, the house seemed to sigh, not in loneliness, but in peace, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to listen. The next day dawned with a strange kind of brightness, the sort that feels almost like a beginning, soft and expectant, as though the air itself were holding its breath for what comes next. The Bastable children woke early. Sunlight spilled through the curtains in golden stripes, and the letter above the hearth caught the light, its old words gleaming faintly on the wall. It was Noel who noticed it first. "The ink looks different today," he whispered. "Like it's glowing." Oswald rubbed his eyes, squinting. "It's just the sun." But even as he said it, something in him knew that wasn't true. After breakfast, they gathered in the garden beneath the apple tree. The atlas lay open on the grass, the brass key glinting beside it, and Alice's locket catching small fragments of light. It was all there, every piece of their journey so far. Oswald leaned over the map. He traced the rivers, the attic, the library, each place marked in their careful childlike script. But something still felt unfinished. He frowned. "We've drawn everything we can see," he said. "But what about what we can't see?" "What do you mean?" asked Dickie. "The roads we haven't walked yet," said Oswald slowly. "The paths that exist only when you start to believe in them." Alice's eyes widened with quiet understanding. "Like invisible roads." "Yes," said Noel softly, his voice carrying the rhythm of poetry. "Roads that appear only when your heart is brave enough to imagine them." The idea lit something inside them all. They spread out across the garden, searching for signs of where such roads might begin. The air shimmered slightly in the noonlight, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the earth beneath their feet was listening. H.O. ran to the far hedge, his wooden sword pointing toward the horizon. "There!" he shouted. "There! There's one! I can feel it!" They laughed, but when they gathered where he stood, a sudden stillness came over them. The grass swayed, and the wind stirred the leaves in a way that felt deliberate, almost like a whisper. Noel opened the atlas again. "Let's draw it," he said. "Even if we can't see it, we can give it a name." And so they began. With charcoal and imagination, they traced roads that curved through unseen valleys, that crossed skies and dreams, that led from their small garden to places no one had ever mapped. Each road had a name: the path of forgotten songs, the road that shines at midnight, the way through wonder. Alice leaned over his shoulder. "What if someone finds our atlas one day?" she asked. "Won't they think these roads are made up?" Noel smiled faintly. "Maybe, but maybe they'll follow them anyway." The sun rose high and bright above them. the shadows shrinking into silence. From the river came the sound of children's laughter, echoes of other adventures, other seekers, and somehow it all felt connected. Dora came out with lemonade and stood watching them, her expression soft and knowing. "You look like you're drawing the world itself," she said. "In a way we are," Noelle replied. "We're drawing the part people forget exists." She set down the tray and joined them, her eyes tracing the swirling lines of charcoal and hope. "Then make sure you leave room for joy," she said gently. "Even invisible roads need sunlight."
They added one more line, one that looped gently back to the square at the center of the map. Their home. Oswald wrote beneath it, "All roads lead back to love." When the map was finished, they sat back to look at it. The paper was smudged with fingerprints, creased from use, and yet it glowed faintly, as if something unseen was moving beneath its surface. Noelle touched it lightly. "Do you think it's real now?" Alice smiled. "It always was. We just had to draw it." As evening came, the sky turned the color of rose water and smoke, the garden filled with the hush of crickets and the soft hum of night. They left the atlas open on the table, and when the last light faded, a faint silver shimmer crossed its pages, lines glowing like constellations finding their shape. From somewhere beyond the hedge, a breeze moved, carrying the scent of the river and the faraway whisper of laughter. The invisible roads were awake now, stretching out into the unseen, ready for those who dared to believe. And the Bastable children, though they didn't yet know it, had just drawn the first map of forever. It began as a quiet morning, the kind that feels too still, as though the world is holding something in its lungs. The sky hung low and pale, the apple tree barely stirring, and the air smelled faintly of rain that hadn't yet arrived. Noelle was the first to notice it. He sat by the open window, his notebook resting on his knees, when the curtain lifted softly, not from any breeze, but from something more deliberate, as if the air itself had turned to whisper. He called out, and soon the others were gathered in the kitchen, their faces still flushed from sleep. He said quietly, "Listen, the wind's speaking." Oswald tilted his head, skeptical at first, but then he heard it too. A low hum threading through the cracks of the window pane, the kind that almost forms words, but dissolves before you can catch them. Alice pressed her palms to the glass. "It's not just wind," she whispered. "It's trying to tell us something." They stepped outside, barefoot in the dewy grass, the chill of morning clinging to their ankles. The air was full of motion now, the kind of movement that carries meaning. The branches of the apple tree swayed slowly, though the rest of the garden stood still. From somewhere near the river, a stronger gust rose and spun through the yard, scattering petals and bits of leaves into the air. It circled them once, gentle, playful, alive, then darted straight toward the wooden table where the atlas still lay open. The pages fluttered wildly, flipping forward on their own, stopping at the newest drawing, the map of invisible roads. The wind stilled. The map shimmered faintly, as though touched by unseen light. Then, without warning,
A faint trail of silver dust began to rise from the paper, lifting into the air like smoke. Alice gasped. "It's moving!" The silver lines formed, curving upward, recreating the invisible roads they had drawn, but now glowing, floating in the space before them like threads of light. Dora covered her mouth, speechless. The glowing lines twisted and met above the apple tree, forming a single, spiraling symbol, a shape that seemed alive, changing as they watched, becoming almost a doorway made of air and light. Noelle's voice trembled. "It's showing us where they lead." Oswald stepped forward, the light flickering across his face. He reached out a hand, and the glow bent toward his fingers like a tame flame leaning toward its maker. The wind rose again, not cold this time, but warm and full of sound. It wasn't words exactly, but it felt like understanding, as though 1,000 soft voices were whispering the same message at all once. Dickie closed his eyes, trying to catch the meaning. When he opened them again, he said quietly, "It tells us to remember that everything we've done matters." The wind swirled once more around them, lifting their hair, their laughter, their awe. It wound through the branches, tugged at the locket on Alice's neck, and brushed against the letter framed by the window. For a heartbeat, every piece of their story, the river, the attic, the library, the lanterns, seemed to awaken at once. The entire house sighed, the air filled with quiet radiance. And then, just as suddenly, the wind fell still. The silver lines faded back into the atlas, leaving only faint glimmers across the page, as if the map itself was breathing. Silence settled again, but it was a living silence, the kind that hums beneath your ribs, that makes you feel both small and infinite. Alice broke it first. "What do you think it meant?" Oswald smiled faintly. "That the world listens," he said. "That maybe we're not just finding magic, maybe we're becoming part of it." Noel looked down at his notebook. He wrote one line, slowly, carefully, letting the words find him, rather than forcing them. "The wind remembers the names of those who dream." They stood together beneath the apple tree, watching the last of the silver dust drift into the morning light. The air felt charged now, not heavy, not strange, but sacred. When they finally went back inside, the pages of the atlas remained open on the table. If one looked closely enough, one might see the faintest ripple of movement.
A road curving, a mountain breathing, a whisper left behind by the day the wind spoke. And though no one said it aloud, each of them knew something unseen had begun to move again, in the world and in them. The town smelled of rain and iron that morning, a clean, metallic fragrance that followed each footstep down the cobbled streets. Mist hung low between the roofs, and the air shimmered with that strange hush that comes before discovery. The Bastables were on their way to the market, the atlas wrapped carefully in cloth under Oswald's arm. Father had gone to repair a roof near the square, and Dora had errands to run. The younger ones followed.
each lost in their own small cloud of thoughts. They passed the bakery, its windows fogged with sugar and steam, and the smell of warm bread trailed after them like comfort itself. Beyond it stood a small shop tucked between two taller buildings, its door framed by gears and brass ornaments that glinted in the light. Above the window, in letters faded but proud, was written, "Horatio Finch, maker of timepieces and wonders." Alice stopped first, drawn by the soft ticking that spilled from within. It wasn't ordinary ticking. It sounded like music wrapped inside silence. "Can we go in?" she asked. Dora hesitated. They had no coins to spend on trinkets, but curiosity won, as it always did. "Just a moment," she said. Inside, the air smelled of oil, oak, and the faint sweetness of varnish. Clocks of every shape and size lined the walls. Grandfather clocks, pocket watches, tiny glass domes filled with delicate brass stars that turned slowly on invisible strings. The shop was alive with motion, but it was a calm kind of movement, as if time here was breathing, not running. Behind the counter sat an old man with gentle eyes and hair the color of frost. He looked up as they entered and smiled as though he had been expecting them. "Ah," he said softly, "the map makers." The children froze. Oswald blinked. "You know us?" The man chuckled. "In a way. The wind spoke of you." They exchanged startled glances. Noel clutched his notebook tighter. "How could the wind tell you?" The clockmaker gestured to the wall behind him. A dozen pendulums swung together, their motion forming a faint rhythm, almost like a whisper given shape. He said, "If one learns to listen, the world speaks in every sound." He stood and came around the counter, moving with surprising grace for someone so old. "What brings you here?" Oswald hesitated, then said simply, "We're looking for what's next." The old man smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you've come at the right hour." He led them to the back of the shop, where a great clock stood taller than any of them. Its face was made of glass so clear it seemed invisible, and instead of numbers, tiny symbols marked the hours. Stars, rivers, trees, keys, lanterns. The second hand did not move in a circle, but in a spiral, turning inward towards its center, as if time here folded upon itself. Dora watched, mesmerized. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's more than that," said the clockmaker. "This clock does not measure time as we do. It remembers moments instead." He pressed a hidden latch, and the glass face slid open, like the cover of a book. Inside, where gears should have been, there was only light, soft, golden, and deep as memory. Each spark here is a moment someone thought was gone, a kindness, a laughter, a dream. But nothing truly passes. Time keeps it all. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small brass gear, engraved with tiny swirling letters. He handed it to Oswald. "This belongs to your map. It will help you see what eyes often miss." Oswald turned it in his palm. It was warm to the touch, as though it had a pulse. "What do we do with it?" The clockmaker smiled. "Listen to it. When the time is right, it will tell you where to go." Before they could ask more, the great clock behind him chimed once, a deep, musical sound that rippled through the air. He looked up, his eyes suddenly bright, almost young. "Ah," he said softly, "it seems your next moment has already begun." He guided them back to the door, and as they stepped outside, the mist began to lift, revealing shafts of sunlight breaking through. When they turned to thank him, the window of the shop reflected only the street behind them. The ticking had vanished.
The sign above the door was blank wood now, as though the shop had never been there. Dora's breath caught. Was that real? Oswald looked down at the small brass gear still glowing in his hand. "Yes," he said quietly, "as real as time." They walked home slowly, the light growing warmer with each step. When they reached the garden, Oswald placed the gear in the center of the atlas. It pulsed once, and faint golden lines spread from it, weaving through their invisible roads, joining every place they had marked. The whole map shimmered, alive and breathing. Noel whispered, "It's like he gave us the heart of time." Alice smiled softly. "Maybe he did." And as evening fell, the wind rose again, curling gently around the house like a familiar friend. Inside, the clocks of their hearts ticked in quiet harmony, each beat a reminder that every moment they had lived was still alive somewhere, turning, shining, waiting. Night came softly that day, like a hush laid gently over the world. The garden glowed faintly beneath the moon, and the river beyond the hedge shimmered like a silver ribbon, whispering secrets only dreamers could hear. The Bastable children gathered beneath the apple tree, the atlas open on the table, the brass gear resting in the center, still pulsing with that quiet golden rhythm, like the slow heartbeat of time itself. Dora had lit a small lantern beside it, its flame swaying gently with the breeze. The wind felt different that night, cooler, purposeful, alive. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once as though granting permission for something to begin. Oswald leaned forward, his voice low. "Do you think it's ready to show us?" Noel ran a finger along the edges of the map. "Maybe it already has been," he said. "Maybe we just haven't learned to see it yet." As he spoke, the brass gear began to turn, slowly at first, then with sure, steady motion. The golden light from its center spread outward, touching the rivers, the roads, the skies they had drawn, and every line began to glow, weaving together into something new. The roads curved and bent, folding like silk threads under invisible hands until a single luminous pattern emerged, a long, arching shape that rose across the page, bright and delicate like a bridge made of light. "The bridge," whispered Alice, her eyes wide. "The bridge of stars." They watched breathless as the light lifted from the paper, stretching into the air above the table, a perfect reflection of the map's glowing shape,
hovering just beyond reach. It arched upward through the branches of the apple tree, reaching toward the open sky. The stars above seemed to stir in answer, their reflections trembling in the river below. H.O. clapped his hands in awe. "Can we walk on it?" Dora smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. "I don't think it's meant for feet," she said softly. "I think it's meant for hearts." The light shimmered, and as they stood watching, a sound rose, faint at first, like wind brushing over crystal. Then it deepened into music, not from instruments, but from something larger, older, as if the universe itself were humming its approval. Noel's voice was barely a whisper. "It's singing to us." Oswald closed his eyes. "What's it saying?" The melody wrapped around them, carrying no words, but meaning, pure and simple, like sunlight through rain. It felt like every place they had been, every moment they had shared, every dream they had dared to believe, all joining together in one great glowing truth. When the music faded, the bridge remained, a soft arc of light, steady and waiting. And from its highest curve, a single star fell, slow and deliberate, landing soundlessly in the atlas before them. It shimmered once, then sank into the page, leaving behind only a small mark, a symbol none of them recognized, but all somehow understood. Dora placed her hand over it, her eyes shining. "Whatever it means," she said, "it's ours." They stayed there for hours, watching the bridge fade back into the night sky. The stars above seemed closer now, as if the distance between heaven and earth had thinned for a little while. When they finally went inside, the atlas still glowed faintly, the mark pulsing in rhythm with the brass gear. A quiet light, steady and eternal. That night, as each of them drifted to sleep, they dreamed the same dream, of walking together across a bridge made of stars, hand in hand, their laughter echoing softly through eternity. And though dawn came quietly, the feeling lingered, a golden warmth beneath their ribs, the certainty that something vast had shifted, that they were no longer just seekers of treasure, but keepers of wonder. Dawn came slowly that morning, not bursting with light, but unfolding in soft, tender gold. The mist over the fields glowed faintly, and the air held the stillness of a world that knew it had changed. Inside the Bastable house, everything felt quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. The letter on the mantel shimmered faintly in the sun, the locket caught the light, and the atlas on the table breathed softly, its pages warm to the touch. Oswald woke first. He lay in bed, eyes open, listening to the heartbeat of the morning, the drip of dew, the faint rustle of wind, and the whisper of the river calling from beyond the hedge. He rose without a sound.
Something deep in him knew. Today was the end of their journey and the beginning of what came after. By the time the others joined him in the garden, the sky had cleared to a flawless pale blue. The apple tree stood bright and still, its branches heavy with fruit and light. The atlas lay open on the table once again, and beside it the brass gear turned slowly on its own. Noel touched it gently. "It's moving faster today." Dora leaned closer, watching as the motion sent faint ripples of light across the pages. "It's like it's leading us somewhere," she murmured. Oswald nodded. "Then let's follow." The wind stirred, and the page began to turn, not with their hands, but as if guided by an unseen breath. The atlas opened to a blank space near the center, where faint gold lines began to appear, forming a circle. Inside it, a word etched itself slowly into the parchment. Home. Alice pressed her hand to her heart. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the last."
But his voice carried no sadness. It was the tone of someone who had found what he was meant to find. The brass gear pulsed once more, then grew still. The locket on Alice's neck glimmered, catching the sunlight one last time, and the faint outline of the bridge of stars appeared in the sky above them, just for a heartbeat, before fading into the blue. Dora wiped a tear she hadn't meant to shed. "What do we do now?" Oswald smiled. "We keep it alive," he said. "All of it." Noel opened his notebook, its pages nearly full now. Poems, sketches, bits of dreams. He wrote one final line, his hand steady, his heart clear. "The greatest treasure is not what we find, but what we remember and what remembers us." They spent the rest of the morning together, picking apples, laughing, telling the same stories they had told 100 times before. But this time, each story felt sacred, as if spoken to the very soul of the world. When afternoon came, Father joined them in the garden. He looked at the children, their faces bright and peaceful, and something in him softened. He didn't ask what they'd found. He didn't need to. He could see it in their eyes. As the sun began to set, the light poured through the branches of the apple tree, turning everything gold. The lanterns they'd hung long ago swayed gently, their glass catching the glow of evening. Oswald looked around at his family, at the garden, at the house that now seemed to hum with memory and light, and quietly, to no one and everyone at once, he said, "Thank you." The wind moved through the leaves in answer, soft, kind, familiar, a final whisper from the invisible roads they had once drawn. And for a moment, the world itself seemed to pause, to listen, to remember. When night finally fell, the stars appeared, bright, infinite, watching, and among them, one shone a little brighter than the rest, as if keeping guard over a small house with a glowing heart, and a family who had once gone in search of treasure, and instead found the universe. Sleep now, dear dreamer, for the treasure you seek is already within you. You only have to remember where your heart feels most like home.